Now, today is very exciting for us here in Vancouver because we get to hear from two writers who are coming to us all the way from Ontario. And it's especially exciting because they're going to be discussing a wonderful new book right here that helps uncover parts of Canada's Black history that are not commonly known. The book is, of course, Finding Edward, which is beautiful. And I recommend everyone go and get a copy at your favorite local bookstore. So let's get into it. I'm excited to introduce Donna and Sheila. So please join me on stage. Hello. Nice to see you.
Hi there. Hi, everybody.
Hey.
Hi. Yeah.
So Donna Bailey Nurse is a leading Canadian literary critic who specializes in the work of Black women writers around the world. She's a columnist for the CBC's radio's The Next Chapter. She's a contributor to the Walrus, Maclean's, and the Literary Review of Canada. She's curated many, many literary events, including some for the Toronto Luminato Festival. And she's also been a juror for the Governor General's Nonfiction Prize, the Hilary Weston Prize, and the Amazon First Novel Prize. Also the 2019 Scotiabank Giller Prize. She's also the author of two books, Revival, which is an anthology of Black Canadian writing, and What's a Black Critic to Do? She's also currently working on two books for HarperCollins, which explore her Black Canadian heritage. It's such an honor to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
It's wonderful to be here. Good to see you again.
Yes, good to see you again. Sheila Murray is a writer born and raised in England and who now lives in Hamilton, Ontario. Her short fiction has been published in many, many literary journals, including Descant, the Dalhousie Review, and the New Quarterly. And Finding Edward is her first novel. She's an advocate for social justice and currently leads a grassroots volunteer-driven initiative that engages urban residents in adapting to local climate change impact. That's amazing. So what they're gonna do is they're gonna have a conversation for about 40 minutes. Then they're gonna take questions from the audience. So for the audience, quick ask, please use the Q&A button in the bottom of your screen. So that's the easiest way for us to submit and collect the questions. You're able to upvote other people's questions or comment on questions. So instead of writing your own question, if someone asks a similar question, just upvote someone else's question. If you have no idea what I'm talking about with this Q&A button and you're more familiar with the chat, that's okay too. You can submit your question on the chat and we'll figure out a way to get to it. So that's it from me. Donna, take it away. Sheila, wonderful to have you here.
Thank you so much. Great.
Hi, everybody.
Great. Yeah.
Great to be here and so wonderful to finally meet you. I've been thinking about you for about a year nonstop and it feels like we should have met by now.
Oh, Donna, yes. I'm thrilled to meet you. I'm so looking forward to this conversation today.
I know, so am I. I really am. I hope I have time left over for the audience because I get so worked up when there's something that means as much to me as this book means to me. I just want to thank you for writing this extraordinary novel. And on behalf of on behalf of readers who love great books, but also on behalf of, Caribbean Canadians, Black Canadians. And it's a story that's also very personal to me because the protagonist could have been my dad. And it's almost as though I could understand him more through what you've said. Then of course, your parents never tell you anything, right? So yeah. I can really, and it's just such a wonderful novel. And I feel it's a real blessing for Black Canadians and for Canadians generally to have it. So thank you for writing such a gorgeous and I believe lasting work. I wanted to say, first of all, could you just give us a synopsis of the story?
Yes.
For the audience members who have not read the book so far?
I can indeed. And Donna, I want to say, but I have to say in response to what you've just said, first of all, thank you so much. Also, this is something I haven't mentioned before, but one of the things that brought me to the sort of character Edward in the book, and I'll talk a little bit and I'll give you a synopsis in a moment, but Edward's pretty important for sure. And I chose the year of his birth because it was essentially the year of my dad's birth. Oh, and my dad was an immigrant from Jamaica, round through the UK into Toronto finally. But I wanted to know what Toronto would have been like for a man his age. Wow. So I love what you've just said.
Oh, I love hearing that. No wonder it feels so intimate, which it really does feel. you know.
Great.
Okay, so give a synopsis
Yeah.
For the audience, for the
Yeah. So the book is essentially a sort of a coming of age of a young mixed race man who comes from Jamaica to Toronto in the year 2012, and the year is really important. He sort of arrives at the end of 2011, and the book winds up around the beginning of 2013. But 2012 matters. And he comes to the city because everybody says he should. It's not been his choice. But he does what's expected of him. He's a very dutiful young man, and he has half brothers and sisters who need his who quite honestly will need him to support them now that their parents are gone. And so he arrives, he lands, stays with family friends who welcome all sorts of folk from, arriving in the city, because they're dutiful also. But he doesn't make any real connections. And he, as he struggles to find his feet, he's a very lonely, searching young man, and just trying to figure out what his purpose is and how to go about it. So eventually he sets off for university, and in all of that, he is introduced by a most unusual person to the evidence of a young mixed race boy who was born in the very early 1920s in Toronto, and he feels all sorts of pulls to know more about this young man. So that helps Tim with his life, because he's a lonely guy. He really is lost for purpose. He doesn't fit in a whole lot of places. And this young boy born in the very early 20s, who is Edward, becomes very important to him and gets him through that first year.
Can you read it? You said you're going to read a little bit. Could you do that now?
I'm going to read
that up for us a bit.
Yeah, I will. So I'm going to read from, this is just a short piece. And we've been talking about Cyril. This is about Cyril. And the day that he needs to make a change. So he hasn't been in Toronto for that long. So again, it's 2012. He's 20 years old. He's been in Toronto for about 6 weeks, not long at all. He'd been staying with family friends, but as I'd said, his welcome's been lukewarm. And on this fateful day, he's had a very bad experience with the daughter's visiting boyfriend. He hasn't yet discovered the beginnings of the Edward mystery that he will follow through the book. At this moment, he's alone, and he's hurt, and he's angry. Cyril kept his head down and watched the toes of his boots rise and fall and slap, rise, fall, slap. By the time he made his second turn of the 9 long blocks that took him beyond the convenience store, behind the apartment buildings, and along the fence that separated the railroad tracks from the road, by the time he made that second turn, he was ready to make a decision, his own decision, about what was to happen next. In the no-frills supermarket was a bulletin board with neighborhood notices. Cyril had looked them over a number of times. Childminders, house cleaners and temporary jobs, stuff for sale, a TV set, a motor scooter, kids' toys. Rooms to rent, one that charged just a little more a week than he was asked to give Uncle Junior. He wrote down the number and made his way to the only payphone he knew of. It was often in use, though not right now. He had rarely seen a payphone in Jamaica, where most everyone had a cell phone. Before Digicel arrived on the island, most of the people in his village had no phones at all. The lady who answered asked a lot of questions, and when she learned that his only job was part-time in the convenience store, she said that she would be hanging up. But I can give you money at the start of the week, said Cyril, which calmed her. He found the little street running off Western, a short run to the fence in front of the railroad tracks. It was the 4th one in, a little house flanked by others like it, but not quite the same. It was 1 story high with a small window above the main floor just under the roof and framed by shutters. The scale of the house, of the street, pulled him in. Small enough to navigate, to understand, to maybe feel at home. He opened the gate, one hinge tied with a coat hanger, and walked to the door. It opened before he touched the bell. "Come in," the woman said. They stood together in the hallway between a rack of coats and a gold-framed mirror in which he could see himself. She was a dark-skinned, middle-aged lady. She asked again for his history and the source of his income, for his future plans, why he was here in her neighborhood. Satisfied, she led him downstairs that were lit by a motion detector and into the basement of the house. A real bed. The room smelled musty, like a place under the ground, which it was. There was a toilet that she said no one else would use, a shower stall and a sink. Luxury bonuses, the lady explained. He would not find these amenities for this price anywhere else in the neighborhood. The room was small. The other half of the basement was hers and full of boxes. Her list of rules, the breaking of which would result in immediate eviction and loss of deposit, he dismissed as irrelevant. No girls, no drugs, no weapons, no parties, no pets, no mess, no late night noise, no loud music, especially rap. The lady was adamant and Cyril was smug. None of those applied. He said, "Don't worry about me, Miss Beale. I'm quiet. I just got here, so I don't have friends. I'm focused on my university studies. That's it."
Thank you so much, Sheila. That was wonderful. I got a smile on my face as soon as you started reading about him, or because he's the kind of person you feel like you know. You just feel like, oh, there he is. And oh, I haven't seen him for a while. It was just lovely to be in his real presence again. Why? Now, I know that we're going to talk about Edward for sure, so don't worry about that. But the first thing I want to know is why Cyril? Why is this a person? Because anybody might say he's not a very interesting person, and he's not the person we ever really read about in many contemporary novels, certainly not in the newspaper. He's not the kind of Jamaican person Jamaican young man we regularly come up against. But why this person? Why is this an important person for you to share with us?
Well, I think there are two answers there. One is that he's mixed race as I am. And I really, as we struggle with identity and belonging in this business that comes up over and over again for everybody, I think everybody has some aspect of that to struggle with. And I do think probably just about everybody, but to be mixed race, to be a particularly visible mixed race, so half black and half white in this sense. I'm multiracial. I know my DNA comes from zillion places, but to have a visible color that is identified as black, and I do identify as black, I should add that, is of great interest. Where do we sit? How do we experience that? How do other people experience us? And I think there are simple answers, and then there are much longer, more nuanced answers. And so I wanted to explore that to some extent. And then I've spent a fair bit of time in Jamaica, and while there, I've known a few young people who have left to go to foreign to make a life for themselves. And they have done it against all odds, with very few resources and huge determination and courage, because it takes an awful lot of courage. And there are two in particular, and I'll just mention them because they inform who Cyril is. So one young guy is in the US. He's a wonderful guy. He's done really well. He's just about to finish his PhD now. He left with nothing, essentially.
Is he a friend or something? Is he a friend of yours?
No, he was a friend of he was a guy we met in town, actually. My sister and I met him walking in town one day. He was 12 years old.
Okay.
So I'd known him for a long time. And so he said to me, the way he gets through is the way he approaches things and approached things back then, because he's had a lot of experience now, but he's in the US, as I said. When sort of faced with something new, he would have spent time imagining himself already there, going through that process. He'd visualize the whole experience, you know, in the physical space and so on. And that was where and how he found the courage to get to pull off a PhD, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
And then the other young woman, and I'm always struck by this, she's very similarly determined and has and done equally well. But when she stayed with me when she first came to Toronto, she's a young Black woman. And I lived in the Queen Street West area, which I always think of as, you know, relatively multicultural. Their streets are full of all sorts of different faces.
Yeah. Yeah.
She went for a walk on her first day and came home and said, there's nobody there who looks like me. And I understood exactly. I mean, I hadn't considered that she would have that experience, but it was a very important reminder. So that's who Cyril is. He's those people. And he is quietly determined, and he's going to do the right thing.
Right, he's upright for sure. And I do really identify with that incredible determination that I think of as a first generation thing, because once you get to me, I see my parents and I just can't believe, and everybody at, you know, aunts and uncles at that generation before us, I just can't believe how much they accomplished, their courage, and their determination. And I think it's just astonishing, you know. The other one thing I want to talk about just before we move on to Edward is the Jamaica that you're portraying, the Jamaica that Cyril leaves. I think it's I identify with that Jamaica. Although there are many harsh aspects to Jamaican life, and we all know what they are, you know, the gun violence, I guess the colorism, homophobia, definitely the poverty. I don't think we get enough about something else that is super true, which is that it's really, first of all, it's stunningly beautiful, and that's in the spirit. It's like people are singing. You can't even be there anywhere. People sing constantly. They don't even talk. They sing. You know, if you get up in the morning, all you hear are people walking down the street singing, something you would think you would never hear on the streets of Toronto, right? Yeah. And the generosity of the people and the love of the people, the faith, and, you know, genuinely, I have to say, for me, it's the generosity. And so Cyril, how do you say his name? Cyril?
Yes, Cyril, yeah.
Cyril, okay. Cyril, although he's the child of a woman who's not very well off, the woman's employer actually, you know, mentors him, becomes like a granddad to him because he has no father, no man in the house. His white father is not there. Takes him on trips, leaves him money so that he can eventually afford his university education. And the truth of that is, it's not unusual. That is a norm. And that is not well. So, but at the same time, I've been reading Nicole Dennis Benn, the Jamaican writer, Patsy, and Here Comes the Sun, and who else? Marlon James, and even Olive Sr., who is not as harsh, but still her depiction of class is very harsh. And yet there, in yours, all of that is there, but there is still this shining tenderness. Can you tell me why you decided to depict it that way? Because you must have had to think about how, or no?
Yeah, you know, certainly I'm familiar with all of those other pieces, and I think there are little hints of it when Cyril was, but overall, the generosity, the warmth, the hospitality, it's so, and the sort of it's so colorful too. It's so warm and colorful. As you say, people sing. You do wake up in the morning and hear someone with a good voice walking up the road to do some farming or something, and he's singing as he goes.
Absolutely.
And I think those are so, it's such a special place, such a special people, and I wanted to remind us that that's there, you know, and that
I'm super grateful for that. Yeah, I'm really grateful for that. Okay, so we're going to talk. I want to talk a bit more now about Edward. Now, Edward is the biracial mystery boy from the Depression era, the story that Cyril comes upon. In the most fascinating way, the story comes to him. And you could talk about a little bit about how the story comes to him through Pat. By the way, I realized that Pat's father is Indigenous. Because Pat's father is Ojibwa, right? And the mother is white, correct?
That's right. That's right.
Okay. So I had it turned around somewhere.
Yeah.
And anyways, yeah, so I talk a little bit about how that story comes to Cyril and tell us a bit about Edward and tell us why he embraces that story, how it comes to have such meaning in his new Canadian life.
Yeah, for sure. So Cyril in his, has begun to spend quite a bit of time in libraries. He's discovered libraries, knows them from home. Libraries in Jamaica, libraries in Canada are a whole other thing. Great big luxurious places. He thinks his library in Western Mount Dennis is awesome, and it's there that he meets Patricia, who is who panhandles on the street, feeds feral cat colonies, speaks loudly to people who aren't there, is quite odd. And he would, who would ordinarily stay well away from her, but on the day he runs into her in the library, she's actually crocheting doilies, and he looks at those doilies, and they are the very same sort of thing that his mother used to crochet at home. And so he strikes up a conversation with her, and she is curious, interested, wants to know what he's up to, wants to know him. And over some time, a little time passes, and she leads him to a place where she knows he's doing research about some sort of Black history. She says, "I've got some research for you. I've got something that you need to know." And so she takes him to one of the storefront churches. There's very sort of poor but very dignified storefront church, where the man who keeps the church, Mr. Addo, has kept a collection of bits and pieces that had been given to him by church goers, people from the congregation, and he's put them in a display case for people to puzzle over. And they are the sort of bits and pieces that lead us to this mystery about Edward. There is something that shows a little boy was born. A little boy. There's a couple of photographs that are very provocative, and then ultimately a mystery: is this boy alive or not? Did he live? And
of course, he's biracial, right? He was abandoned by his white mom, who had an affair with a Black man that she was very much in love with. But in the Depression era Toronto, that was just too much for her to handle on her own. The stigma of it would be too much. To be raising a Black child on your own when you're a white woman was a stigma she couldn't manage.
Exactly. So
she gave him away. She gave him to the poorhouse.
Yeah. Gave him to the poorhouse where he is grown and then is put to work. And we, in the details of, we know some of those details, and we know it's not easy. And we know he has a very limited education. He's a sort of teaches himself to count numbers, but he is tenacious and a determined guy who, when he can, gets away from the poorhouse. So Cyril is drawn to the mystery, because these are things that Cyril will discover as Cyril does his own research. He'll learn these things about Edward, or the likelihood in some cases, and in some cases the fact of Edward. But again, it's he is a mixed race, that they have that in common. He was abandoned by parents. They have that in common. Or Cyril feels that way. He feels abandoned by his mother, despite having sort of very legitimately died. He feels abandoned, and certainly abandoned by his white father. And so that's enough for him to make some pretty strong connections.
I think there's just so much richness in there. I just don't, I don't know if we have enough time, but part of what I want to talk about, first of all, and I have a few questions to ask all about this relationship. But one of the things I find interesting, first I'll talk about the economics, because in this book, which is not very common, I think, I could be wrong, just could be what I'm reading, but it's not very common in contemporary Canadian literature, I find, at least in mainstream, to have so much politics and especially economics brought into the story. And in fact, when you have these beautiful, he's a poor, struggling little boy, freezing cold, gathering coal, living with other, it's very Oliver Twisty. It's very Oliver Twisty. But when you think about Dickens and Oliver Twist, you think to yourself, well, I think anyways, that was really although the characters are exaggerated caricatures and kind of farcical, it was a way of telling a much more truthful story than a lot of realist stories. So, did you make this decision to talk so much about the economic state? I mean, because Cyril is poor when he arrives. Cheryl grows up poor in Jamaica. Cyril's mother dies possibly because she could not access the correct medicines and couldn't afford that. And then, of course, Edward, we know, is, basically indigent. And for much of, so why is that such an important thing for you to bring in such a strong way?
It's a good question, and I haven't really thought about it in that way. I suppose, I was interested in talking about things we tend not to think about, so that poverty is one of those things. It's poverty that makes for hardship. I mean, I think we talk a lot about, the sort of disproportionate effect of things like the pandemic and so on racialized and other communities, vulnerable communities. But I think actually the truth is that if that disproportional impact is felt by people who are managing their lives on very low incomes. It's about being poor. So, you can be racialized and quite middle class and have a completely different experience. You still may get pulled over by the cops. We know that if if you're Black, but otherwise your experience could be quite different. So I wanted to sort of know more about that. I mean, I've always, there's a romance of and I'm sure a lot of people would argue with me, but the unions, that whole idea of the collective coming together for the common good, marching and singing. And I always go to, plenty of protests, and frankly, they're usually really great fun because of the chants and stuff, so I love that there's a romance there. And I think
you really explore so beautifully with the UNIA, United Negro Improvement Association, an organization founded by Marcus Garvey, a Jamaican, that was so influential around the world, especially Jamaica, North America, and in the islands. Just so powerful. And I love the scenes of setting up chairs and, just the power, it's just, and all those wonderfully, powerful, well-dressed, Black people just all together, coming together to assert themselves, they're those are wonderful scenes. Yeah. I just don't think everybody sees those things. I think they're unusual. So I appreciate them. One of the other things I wanted to ask you about now, we were talking already about biracial identity. And one of the things I really feel a lot of Black Canadian literature deals with biracial identity. And I say that even people who are not, like myself, I'm not biracial, but my experience feels very biracial because how I'm growing up, I'm being very much shaped by European culture. And I mean, my parents are Jamaican. What can I say? I'm probably more British than the British, So we have that experience of that culture. And then so that's the same culture that also shuts us out. And I was just thinking, other people write about that. Jamaica Kincaid, a lot of Caribbean writers write wonderfully about that. And even with more, there's something so honest in the way that you are actually saying, look at, they are estranged, but they are family. They are blood family. They are estranged. His white father is not there. And Edward's white mother abandoned him, or so, abandoned him, but they are still family, that. And so it's not like just pure black and white, which I think, no matter. So I really think that you speak to that extremely powerfully and unusually. So can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, and I really, that was super important to me, to be able to bring other people into the story, to have people who wouldn't ordinarily read about these sorts of experiences read and really be able to understand something new from it. So I wanted it to, I really wanted it to engage a whole range of people. And I think from what I hear, it does. And I think one of the best things I've heard from people is, I've never thought about that. I've never thought what it would be like to be Jamaica coming to Canada. And that's, that's what I wanted. That I think really at its heart, that's what I wanted it to do.
There's this line where Searle is thinking about his white dad in England, where he thinks he imagines he is. And he says, would he take me to the Rocky Mountains? Would he hug me? Would he give me guidance in this city? And when I heard "in this city," I kind of remembered Austin Clarke. Yeah. And he had that and I was wondering, were there Caribbean works or any works that you engaged with? I mean, actually, I don't mean it that way. I mean to say, what are books? What are some of the things you've read that have helped feed your imagination on this topic?
I think a whole wide range of things. I mean, I think when you mentioned Austin Clarke, I think it was Austin Clarke who wrote a short story called Canadian Experience. Do you know that one? I may have it wrong, but it
doesn't come to mind, but I'm sure you probably wrote
it. So there's a lot of writing that's really, a lot of stories that are really painful. They're really hard to read, and those have always sort of lived with me. When I was younger, I read a lot of actually people like Alice. I was going to say Alice Munro. Of course, I have read. Iris Murdoch is who I was struggling for. So there are all sorts of writers who have influenced me, and from such a range. But because of all of those, I have some sense of how painful lived experiences can be, but also how magical the world can be, and that's Iris Murdoch, and how ordinary a life can be, but something inside it is an absolute treasure, and that's Alice Munro. So I absolutely love that. I get all of that. And, I feel like you just were so masterful, because I don't understand, like, you really give us a life in so much dimension, because I think it's normal to kind of streamline it to tell your story, but I don't feel it's super streamlined. It just feels like it's super streamlined, it just feels that way. And yet you fit in all this life. And I think one of the things I appreciate is, how you decided to manage. There is that inevitable scene of evil encounter, with the police, without which the story would not be true. I can say for myself. Yeah.
But at the same time, it comes like, how did you manage that? Because it's very easy for that to become the experience of him, but it's not. It's an experience that shapes him, but it's not the experience. And I find that quite unique. Could you talk about that? Did you think about that?
Yeah, I did, of course, thought a lot about that. I knew that it had to happen. I knew that something like this had to happen, because writ large it does, period.
Yeah.
And for those who haven't read the book, this is a brief experience, a bad experience with police late one night, and Cyril hasn't done. He's simply been walking while black is one of the running while black, driving while black. He was just black in the wrong place on the wrong night, met the wrong cop, and so on. But what I really, what does that feel like? I mean, I think we have some very strong sense of what it feels like. For Cyril, who come from a country where cops were black, judges are black, lawyers are black, it's a black country. This is a whole new experience of a white culture, a culture that he thought he had understood before he came, because Jamaicans have such strong connections with Canada and the UK and the US, and so many people there's many people living outside of Jamaica is in it, and so these connections feel very real. So you think you know a place, and then you show up and you don't, and there are all of these subtleties, and one of them is very threatening, and so it's new to him, and I think so his experience is very different from that of a young somebody born and raised here, who's being prepared for that to happen, right? From day one. It's like, this ugly things are going to happen to you, brace yourself, and then they'll be advised to, of how they're going to handle it when it comes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, but he's never had any of that. So when it happens to him, what he feels is humiliation.
Yes.
Which I think must be an experience that everybody, because it's designed to humiliate. He feels humiliation, but he also feels a shame. And then he's unable to talk to anybody about it, and it sits very, very heavily on him. And I wanted to sort of look at that experience just from that different perspective, to kind of pull out some things that we might not have thought about. I mean, you don't just feel physical hurt, anger, humiliation. You feel a whole bunch of other things that run very, very deep. When you encounter that, when you have that sort of experience.
I think the humiliation was really something that stood out to me, because I always think I'm just going to be mad.
Yeah.
Like, and I know personally, like, I know it's designed to humiliate you, but mainly I just feel mad.
Yeah.
So I think that was I really appreciated you just letting us see how that felt on a man. And he does mouth off. I mean, that's what gets him in so much more trouble, because he can't not say something.
Yeah. He gets angry, right? He gets angry early on. Yeah.
Yeah. I really appreciate your managing of that. It was just, I thought, really one more brilliant stroke. Okay, now I know I have I'm supposed to let the questions begin, but because we started late, I'm going to take 3 more minutes, everybody. And then you guys can have your questions, and maybe we can push a little beyond the hour. What else I wanted to ask you about was, obviously, history. So history is just the heart and soul. Black Canadian history. We get to go to Africville. We get to hear about UNIA. We get to hear about Donald Moore. There's just so much we learn by. But it's actually, as Cyril learns, we learn. But I was thinking about you, as Cyril's following Edward. You're following Cyril, following Edward. So you're all researching at the same time. And I was wondering, was this all new to you? What did you learn as a researcher of Black Canadian history, which you had to become? What stood out the most to you? Now, maybe just tell us 1 or 2 things that stood out the most to you.
Well, one thing, you know, as I was looking around, and I'd done this before writing the book and before Cyril started his research. And yes, my research was what Cyril could manage as a very amateur researcher, right? So we don't go that far, but there's enough. Because it's so rich. But one thing I'd already knew before I started was that there are so many communities across this country of Black communities, many of them. And when you Google when you search for you know, Black history in, and you name it, some sort of region of Canada, chances are very good it's going to come up, and it's going to be there's going to be a website, and it's going to have been put up by sort of amateur historians or archivists, and it's going to say at the top, this is a story, this is a history nobody knows, right? Nobody knows our history, and you know, or we few do, and this is what you're looking at right now. So that was one thing I really wanted to sort of, you know more about that, or say something about that. And then I think, you know, in terms of what's discovered, like for it, I knew some of it, but not all of it. But William Hubbard in Toronto, right? Acting mayor. His parents were escaped slaves. Early 19 came up to Toronto. He's born here, I think. And he in the early 1900s became acting mayor of Toronto, not once, but I think 3 times, right? And he's the guy who brought power, literally energy, to the people. Like what the beginning, that was Toronto Hydro. I mean, that was his power for all the people. So this is such an important person, and we're looking at a council now of with so many more Black faces on it than we've seen before in Toronto. But you know what? We've been around a long time on council in Toronto, and I think there are all sorts of folk who deserve to know that, and children should know these things.
Absolutely. Yeah. Children should know that. Absolutely. And that, I think, you know, a lot of books are, you know, they're always like, we have to teach this book. We have to teach it. This is the book we have to teach. I mean, because I don't want books to just be taught because they're full of information, because you could just have a textbook then. But if you want a really quality literary book that shares this is the book. Everybody listening, this is the book, teachers, to be taught. Yeah. Okay. The one last thing I want to say, and I just want to see how you feel about this. You know, so I am so excited about Black History Month, only because I'm not excited really in the way that some people are, like, oh, good, everybody's going to know more about Black history. No, I'm excited for me. I'm going to know more. I'm going to know more about Black history, and Black people are going to get to, and I see that happening. I see Black people finally embracing it for themselves. You know, it's great if more people learn it. It's necessary, but I think it's wonderful and exciting to see people knowing about themselves. But then I was thinking, you know, I do think that as African people, that we care so much about history. Like, we are the people, we are so concerned with our ancestors. And something that really, and in this novel, one thing that is so beautiful that I think some people might make it out to be more magical than it is magical, but it's our reality. Cyril always has the voice of his mother in his head, and the spiritual voice of his mentor, Nelson, in his head, guiding him, telling him where to go. This is our history. This is our answer. Tell me what history means to you as a Black woman.
Oh, I think it's so important. You know, and I have to say off the top, there are lots of things I don't know about my own history. My knowledge doesn't go very far back, and maybe that's part of what makes it so interesting to me. But I do think history is who we are, right? I mean, we in so many ways, and you know, I want to say, you know, think of things like intergenerational trauma, for instance. There are traumas of all sorts, but that's who we are, like it or not. We can't sort of put that aside and say we won't allow that to be part of us. It is part of us.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So we have to go to everybody else now who's signing in. I'm not sorry, I'm glad. But I just want to say how much I really enjoyed talking to you. And now I'm gonna let other people pop in, and that was just a wonderful conversation. Let's
Thank
see.
you, Donna.
Now,
thank you so much.
We'll talk again, won't
Yeah.
we?
Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm trying to see. Okay, so should I only see one in the Q&A? Okay. Is this a comment? Donna's comment about the generosity reminds me of Oz and Joan, Sheila's parents. Oh, adopting a young girl so that she could go to school. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that might be my brother-in-law, Richard.
Hi, brother-in-law.
Yes. So yeah, speaking of generosity, my parents retired to Jamaica, and they a young girl who was the daughter of the lady who cleaned and looked after the house next door, and in the absence of the people, the householders who were often away, so she was there pretty much alone with her daughter. And from time to time, as it happens actually a lot, the power goes out, and they would have no electricity at their house, but my parents had electricity. And so this little girl, I think around age 9, arrived at their door and said, "I'm coming to study my homework here," and called them Gran and Gramps, and it went from there. She lives in Kingston now. She's very successful, has her own business, wonderful woman. Yeah, I guess there you go. That's a story that I hadn't remembered, but it sure is in the book, isn't it?
Yes, it is. That's it.
The spirit of it is. Yeah.
When you're writing this story, somebody's asking here, when you're writing this story, did it change from the beginning what you wanted to write? Like, is this the story you started out with? And I could have asked you that. How did you begin?
No, I began with an entirely different, well, not entirely different, but with a different set of characters. So Cyril was there, and Edward was there. But there were 3 or 4 other characters who were variously older, younger, white, something else, and all of them very nice people. And all of them sort of had become for Cyril. It was a rather different story, but he was still newly arrived in Toronto, and they became his family, so to speak. And they had their own experience. They're long gone. That story was that was a completed manuscript. I really liked them. They are so gone. Yeah. And early readers said, really they'd got to go. The story is about Cyril and Edward, and they were absolutely right. And I'd also let Cyril off the hook for doing all the research with those early characters, because one of them was really helping. And so that was a very important first draft, first story, gone forever.
How long did it take you to write this book? Because to be honest, when I started to talk about this book, I'd say to somebody in the writing world, "Oh, I read this," and they're like, "I've heard that book." Or so I feel like maybe other people have been involved. Like you've been working on it for a while. Is that true?
It's that first draft that I've just spoken about, that was at least 10 years ago. I mean, I'm saying 10 years now, it's like 11. Yeah. And and then the second writing, I can't remember quite how long it took me to come to that second draft, but probably at least another year. I mean, it was never a full-time commitment. I was with a writing group, and so it happened, sort of through that process. And then and then I shopped it around a bit, and then I'd get initial interest, and then the interest would disappear. So really, at the time before it got to Mark Cote at Cormorant Books, it had languished for a long time, and I'd pretty much given up on having it published.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's inspiration right there, people.
Yeah, for anyone with any book out there,
that right.
just keep, every now and again, pick it up and throw it throw it up and see
See
if
what works.
anything happens. Yeah. And, I think that was an introduction to Mark, came through a very dear friend, Karen Mulholland, who was the editor of the Descant magazine. And she'd seen me read from it, so thanks to people like Diaspora Dialogues and Draft Reading Series for giving me the opportunity to stand up in a room with people in it and actually read from the book. That's how I imagine the people who say they've heard that before, they probably saw me at a reading somewhere.
I can't imagine that this book might not be here. So thank goodness for that. Honestly, it's one of those books you can't imagine that wasn't going to be born, Here is a really good question from Trisha. She says, mental health isn't the focus in the book, but I was so moved by how tenuous Cyril sees his position, like going for a walk and wondering if that was the first sign of mental illness and his anxiety. Was addressing mental health in Cyril, or the ways that young men don't always talk about it, was this something you wanted to talk about, mental health?
That's a great question. I don't know that I set out to talk about that. That's not an area in which I have any expertise at all. But I've certainly experienced it from friends who've been very troubled at certain times. And I suppose again, it's one of I'm just very aware that we can fall into ill health so easily, and I can understand, Cyril worrying about wandering the streets. Is this a first, like, does looking at little sparrows in bushes, is this ordinary? So yeah, I hadn't set out to do that, but I think it's a very familiar to me through friends.
Now, all of a sudden, these questions are racing in. Let's go. One of the many revelations, this is an attendee's asking, one of the many revelations to me of the book was about the detailed sense and the worth of Africaville in Halifax. I was born in Halifax and never learned anything about the difficult history of that place. Wow. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. So Africville, for those of you who don't know, was a settlement in Halifax, just on sort of the edge of Halifax. It was where a lot of Black people came up to Canada from the States. They were offered opportunity in Canada for the sort of, the Civil War and other circumstances. Some as people escaped from, through the Underground Railroad and that sort of thing, but a whole bunch of reasons and a whole bunch for opportunity. And when they got here, the opportunity was pretty limited. It wasn't what was promised. And so a lot of Black settlements were given, the scrub land where, it was really hard to grow any crops. They weren't invited to participate in the sort of full economic society of the towns they lived near. They were really pushed out, and in Africville that was very clearly done, because it was a beautiful little community of colorful little houses where people raised their kids and lived their lives and went to church and all the rest of that stuff, but it was never allowed any of the city services that any community sitting right inside a city should have. They didn't give them, running water and electricity and those sorts of things. Not allowed. No roads, no paved road. And then once all of that was done, they could look. Oh, and they everything that was sort of foul was sited around Africville. So the sort of the dump, I mean, that was sort of the lasting dignity when they put a dump basically right on top of it, and then they called it a slum. So we're having created it, they called it a slum. And then the people there who didn't want to leave Africville and who were given a very short choice, which was disappear, or we can take you and relocate you to public housing in Halifax, which was where a lot of you were, of course.
But it was a vivid community. I mean, it was a wonderful community, and they could have made that community a healthy place, but they didn't want that.
They wouldn't. No,
they didn't want it to be a great place. They wanted to get rid of it.
Exactly. It was punished, and for reasons that, systemic racism, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, we just got a couple more. I want to get them in. Any film or TV interest in the story?
I keep getting asked that question, and every time I'm asked, I say, well, if you know any filmmakers, pick them off.
It's perfect for that. Okay. Did you get discouraged? You were talking about how many rejections you have.
Yeah.
How did you? No, this is the question. I love the way Katie, I think her name is. Yeah. She puts it like this: how did you not get discouraged?
Well, Katie, I did get discouraged, and I really, honestly, had thought that the book would never be published. I really didn't think it would until it happened. Truly.
Oh, okay, I've got one last question, and I'm so grateful for it. It's really kind of a statement. Rita is saying that recently she was reading about, the Halifax explosion in 1917, and there's an account of it contained about how Africville residents were affected because it was right there. And I know that a lot of the Black kids were homeless, and they had to hurry up and build the home and have the kids. So, I mean, this is great. She's giving us here, she's citing an article in which we can all read a little bit more about Africville and how it was affected by the Halifax explosion, and it's in Legion magazine. So I've never heard of that. Legion.
No,
magazine.
and I'm gonna look for that. Thanks.
Yeah, me too. I'm also, thank you so much for that, Rita. Okay, guys, we're gonna wrap it up. I'm sorry to go because I could just sit and talk about this for much longer. But thank you so much, Sheila. It was just delightful, really wonderful.
And thank you, Donna. That was a wonderful experience for me. And thanks to everybody who's been watching and listening in. Thanks so much for being here. And thank you so much to Jorge for inviting me to the Vancouver Public Library to do this. So
I'm so happy we did this and that you two got to chat because it's a special thing. And I'm also very happy that we're recording it because I want more people to experience this afterwards.
Oh, that's good.
So on that note, thank you too for being here. Thanks to everyone who joined. And if you want to tell your friends and share it with the world, we're going to upload it to the library's YouTube page.
Oh, great.
We have a channel. Candy's going to share a link with our YouTube playlist where we keep these conversations. So you'll be able to access it there. Quick favor to the audience. We love getting feedback about the events simply because we're public servants. So we work for you. And so your advice makes the events better for us and for everyone. So we're going to share a quick link to a feedback form. It's like a 2-minute survey, and I'll follow up with an email to remind you. If you want to find out about more events like this, follow us on all of our social channels. There's a newsletter. You know how to find the library, so follow us everywhere you want. And I'm just going to tell you about one upcoming event, and then I'm wrapping up. So next Wednesday, February 23rd, we're hosting next Thursday, February 23rd, we're hosting local author Shalene Knight, and she's going to be discussing her new novel, Junie, which is a story of a mother and daughter, and it takes readers into the vibrant Black community of Hogan Sally here in Vancouver in the 1930s. So it's a really interesting part of history as well that I think has a lot of tie-ins with what we were discussing here today. So, and a lot of, parallels with what happened to Africville as well. So come to that one on Thursday. I shared in the chat as well a novel by Jeffrey Colvin who wrote specifically about Africville, and that's the name of the novel. So if people are interested in digging into it, go there. That's it from me. Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. What a wonderful event.
Thank you, Jorge. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.